Nigeria, along with some other African countries, has been hit with a 15% import tariff after a fresh executive order issued by United States President Donald Trump. The U.S. president had in April imposed tariffs on several global trading partners with a 14% levy placed on Nigerian exports. The reciprocal tariffs were later postponed for 90 days to allow time for negotiating individual trade agreements, with the new deadline set for August 1. The tariff hike on Nigeria came at a time President Trump also imposed steep tariffs on exports from dozens of trading partners, including Canada, Brazil, India, and Taiwan. Trump sets rates, including a 35% duty on many goods from Canada, 50% for Brazil, 25% for India, 20% for Taiwan, and 39% for Switzerland. The enabling executive order listed higher import duty rates of 10% to 41%, starting in 7 days for 69 trading partners as the August 1 deadline approached. Some of them had reached tariff-reducing deals, while others had no opportunity to negotiate. Goods from all other countries, not listed, will face a 10% U.S. import tax. Trump had previously said that rates might be higher. The administration also teased that more trade deals were in the pipeline as it seeks to close trade deficits and boost domestic products and factories. Dr. Muda Yusuf is Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He joins me now. Dr. Yusuf, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
One of the big stories this week has been President Trump signing an executive order after the August 2 deadline, hard deadline, it's called Besant, puts it. And the rates range from 10% to 41%. 41%, the highest, is for Syria. Other countries have their own rates. In Africa, it's from about 10% to 30%. So in Africa, you have countries like Angola, Tunisia, South Africa are getting the high rates. All the other countries, about 18 of them, have 15%, and Nigeria is in that category. Now, my first concern is, what does this mean for African countries, particularly for AGOA, which is to be reviewed in September, yeah. And also for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So, how do you assess the impact on African countries? Let's start with that before we go general.
Well, the impact will be significant to some extent, because the impact will be a function of the volume of trade, bilateral trade, between African countries and the United States. If you take a country like South Africa, the volume of trade is quite high between South Africa and United States. If you take a country like ours, Nigeria, the volume of trade between us and the United States is not that high.
It's mainly crude oil.
Yes, it's mainly crude oil. And if you look at the totality of our trade, let's relate to some data here. In 2024, the total trade volume that we did in Nigeria was about 93 billion US dollars. Our trade with United States was only about 10 billion US dollars, which is just about 10%. So in terms of materiality, I don't think it's something that is so material to us, for instance, in Nigeria. And for the countries that export crude oil and gas and energy-related products, one thing, again, is that the tariff policy of the U.S. now has exempted energy products. That is crude oil, gas, maybe fertilizer, and the rest of them. And our own exports to the United States is about 90% or more crude oil and gas. So from the point of view of the level of exposure, from the point of view of the kind of products that we export to the United States, our own vulnerability is very low. But vulnerability of countries like South Africa, maybe Algeria, and all of that, and Libya, yes.
Tunisia.
Those countries have bigger exposure. Therefore, they are more vulnerable. But concerning the African Continental Free Trade Area, I think as a bloc, this is not really a regional issue as it is. The only lesson there is that we should learn to look inwards a lot more, to pursue what we call now economic sovereignty at the national level and at the continental level. But the issue of trade between US and African countries are purely bilateral issues, country-to-country issues. That is it. But the bigger issue for me now is the consular issue. I'm talking about the visa issue between Nigeria and United States. And even Ghana and a few countries like that. Now, trade, particularly trade in goods, even trade in services, require a lot of physical interaction. If you have a situation where you have this very serious limitation as far as visa is concerned, we are talking about 3 months visa, single entry. It's as good as telling you not to come to their country. And we are talking of a country that hosts the largest population of diaspora Nigerians. So that for me is a bigger issue, because if you are a trader, you are doing a lot of business with US. You need to go there more frequently. Those who are holding the visa now, once it expires, they cannot get a 5-year renewal. It's going to be 3 months, single entry. That's a major barrier going forward as far as trade between us and the United States is concerned. Another thing to stress here is that all of these things, we need to draw critical lessons from it. Because this is about economic nationalism. It's about economic security. It's about economic sovereignty. We have to be conscious of that, because that is where Trump is coming from. And this can happen to any country. Our exposure is not so big, so we may not feel it that much. But the lesson is that we should learn to be less dependent on other countries for our critical needs as a country. We should focus a lot on food security, energy security, and even the things we need for our own internal security. Because the more dependent you are, the more vulnerable you will be.
Okay, Doctor, I get that point. Now, the G20 summit is going to take place in South Africa in September. Yeah. And some of these countries are hoping that, okay, at that meeting, they could still cut deals with the United States. After all, the United States, whether it's Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary speaking, or Scott Bessent, the Trade Secretary speaking, they've said, okay, we're still open to deals. Now, do you think that September meeting of the G20 provides an opportunity, even though Donald Trump says he will not be there because he doesn't have good relationship with South Africa?
Okay, of course.
So any possibility for deals?
That is even the first signal that nothing concrete, as far as American relationship with other countries is concerned. Because Trump, from the way he has carried on since inception, he has no regard for all this multilateral relationship, all this diplomatic relationship with many other countries, all these UN-related issues, and so on. Everything is highly transactional. That is from the American interest point of view. So I don't see the G20 meeting having any significant, impact on the current position of United States on many of these issues. Because it's a very rigid position. I mean, if that administration can do what it did to the EU, to Canada, I mean, who else will matter? Because these are critical allies, traditionally, of the United States.
Well, Mexico has a 90-day window. China still has up till August 12th. China is the big elephant in the room.
China is the big elephant. And you see, that is why it is good to have a very sound economy. The respect that China is having today is because of its economic status. Whereas it's very easy to call the bluff of other countries. You can't easily call the bluff of China. China may suffer for it, but they will also take a big hit from it. You can see that the relationship on this trade matter with China has been very cautious. You know, they have been very measured. I'm talking of the United States now. Because of the status of China. Because over time, the Chinese government, over time, had concentrated on building a very robust economy, a very resilient economy, an economy that has now become the powerhouse for production globally. That is earning that country a lot of respect. That is why I said at the beginning that as a country, there are lessons to learn from what is happening globally now, especially from this Trump tariff.
Okay, how best should African countries adjust? Should they turn towards China? Because some people have been saying, well, if the United States is becoming very difficult, why don't we turn towards China?
Of course, even already, if you look at trade between Africa and United States, and trade between Africa and other countries, particularly Europe and Asia, we have more trade with Asian countries and European countries than with America. I just cited the example of Nigeria. 90% of our trade is with either European countries or Asian countries, and a little, of course, with African countries. So it's only 10% exposure we have. So already, even for many African countries, the exposure to the United States in terms of trade is not that significant, except for a few countries, like maybe South Africa, Algeria, and Libya. Yes.
But Lesotho on April 2nd got 50% reciprocal tariff. Now they have reduced it to 15%. Now the fear is that, look, in Lesotho, I think they export mostly textile, clothing materials to the United States. They've already shut down many factories. They've restrained staff and all of that. So other countries, the fear is that there will be an increase in inflation. There will be an increase in the depreciation of national currency because of the loss of trade with the United States. Will Nigeria be affected by that, or we are safe?
No, we cannot be significantly affected. First, our exposure is very limited, and even the little exposure we have, close to 80 or 90% of it is exempted because it's crude oil and gas. So we are not as vulnerable. The only vulnerability we have is the impact of all this instability, inconsistency, unpredictability that is being caused by this Trump administration on the global economy. Because once something begins to happen globally, there is no way we will not be affected. Because it's affecting global confidence generally. Because when major economies are not working together, they are not in sync, it affects the global economy.
But why then are you concerned about 3 months visa limitation?
No. You see, what I'm concerned is that we have a relationship. Because all the discussion now is about trading goods. We have a relationship around trading services. That is one. Secondly, we have over 350,000 Nigerians in the United States. And a lot of them are doing very good business. Not all of them have permanent residency there. And you know what diaspora flows means for our balance of payment position. It's very significant. Sometimes we get more from diaspora flows than even from crude oil. So given that strategic relationship, I believe that this 3-month visa thing is something that requires urgent attention. by our Foreign Affairs Ministry. They have to do a lot. I mean, they have to do something very critical and very urgent about it. That is why I think it is important. And even for the little trade that we do, you need physical movements to activate effectively your trade relationship.
Okay, let me deal with a general question.
Yes.
Now, with all of this, Trump may have asserted the status of America as the superior power of the world. He says he wants to address the trade deficit with the United States, improve production within the United States, correct years of injustice towards the United States, create jobs and all of that. Some people have other views. They say inside America, it will drive up inflation. That most of the jobs that is canceling from other parts of the world, they are low-paid jobs. In America, those jobs will be expensive. In other words, in the long run, Trump's focus may be counterproductive. Do you agree with the view that Trump may have placed America in a situation where it will lose its global leadership status in world trade?
Yes, as far as trade is concerned, that could happen. Because a lot of the major trading partners are now shifting focus, to attract more trading partners. That is one. Secondly, even this tariff that is so much emphasizing, it is the citizens of the United States that will pay most of those tariffs. At least about 80% of that tariff will be paid by the citizens of the United States. They have been celebrating the amount that has been realized. But the truth is that the tariff is a tax on the citizens to a large extent. Maybe those who are exporting to US may suffer part of it. But most part of it will be paid by the citizens. So I don't think he has the nationalistic flavor or commitment or passion. But I don't think he fully understands the economics of trade and how it works. Now, you want to move manufacturing back to the United States. That's a marathon. It's a long journey. Because it's about competitiveness. If you produce something, even if everybody opens their doors for American goods to come, how many American goods can compete with goods from China or from India or from all these other countries in terms of price? So at the end of the day, the name of the game is competitiveness.
Okay.
If people go and produce in US, unless you sell only to the US market,
okay,
where are you going to export to?
Okay, enough of Trump and his wahala, as we say in Nigeria.
Yes.
Let's talk about Nigeria. There's been some talk in the last week about the trickle-down effect of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's reforms. He has been praised by the IMF, he has been praised by the World Bank, but there are persons, groups, constituencies, stakeholders in Nigeria who say that in their own part of the country, they don't see the effect of these reforms. So what do you think? Do you think that Tinubu's economic policy is selective and discriminatory?
No. Far from it. Now, we are dealing with major macroeconomic issues here, which the administration have been struggling to correct. Because when you have major distortions, it's like you have a very weak foundation. If the foundation is weak, you cannot put quality superstructure on that foundation. The whole structure will collapse. Reform is a journey. And even to get the results so quickly will be a tall order. We are talking of just 2 years. Even to come to recover from all the legacy issues. I mean, for instance, you had to clear a debt of about $7 billion outstanding forex obligations. $7 billion. You have to deal with issues of all these forward sales. Most of our crude have been sold upfront. Securitization of our crude. Even to some extent, even our reserves. We had a situation where the the fiscal position was almost completely collapsing. We had a situation where even our external position had practically collapsed. Because before the advent of this administration, I'm not holding brief for them, our letters of credit with most banks were no longer being honored abroad. Because we could not honor the foreign, there was no forex to back up all those transactions. So to get out of all those issues will take minimum of a year before you now begin to reset, So the point I'm making is that the macro issues need to be properly addressed first to clear all of this. I mean, we got to a point where airlines were no longer coming to Nigeria. It was as bad as that. These are fundamental issues that we are dealing with. So we needed to get out of that before we now begin to deal with issues, of how to deal with sectoral issues, other sectoral issues, and all of that.
Okay.
And we are just 2 years into this.
Okay. No. Doctor,
yes.
Don't sound like you are giving excuses for the Tinubu administration. Because the opposition, they are saying that the government is borrowing too much. You say they have cleared debt, they have done this, part of the reforms. But why are they borrowing so much? Because it's like, okay, you clear one debt, you borrow more in another area. And Nigerians are asking, what is this borrowing? What is it being used for? They are hearing that, okay, it should be used for infrastructure, energizing education, energizing health sector. But the people say, we can't see it.
Well,
why is that optical problem?
There are partisan ways of looking at things. Some of the commentaries are partisan. And when you have partisan coloration to things like this, of course, you cannot rule out this extreme bias or prejudice in the analysis. But the truth of the matter is that I agree that we need to worry about debt sustainability. I agree. And the way to deal with it, first, is to be conscious about the cost of the debt that you are taking. At what interest rate are we taking these debts? Whether it is domestic debt, whether it is external debt. Because that can affect the weight of the burden that we will carry now and in future. Second is the tenure of the funds. What is the time frame? Because the longer the time frame, the longer the opportunity for you to adjust down the road. As your liquidity improves, you can even refinance some of the debts and get out of it. Third is, to your point, what exactly are we using the debt for? Because if debts are used for things that does not support the capacity of the economy productively to repay the debt, that can be an issue. So we need to interrogate all of that. And we also need to interrogate the capacity to pay the debt. Otherwise, we could end up in a debt trap. No matter how well-intentioned, no matter how good the projects are, there must be clear line of sight of capacity to repay the debt. So I agree, the managers of the economy need to look properly at our fiscal position so that we ensure fiscal realism and fiscal sustainability. This is not a partisan issue. This is about economic sustainability. So I don't run into the embarrassment of defaulting in some of these debts.
Okay. You say it's economics, it's not politics. But the debt management office is saying we can still borrow more. That we have a threshold, an internationally prescribed threshold of 56%, but that where we have reached is 50%. Okay, must we borrow till 56% and borrow beyond?
No. I don't agree with that position. Now, you are using, some of them are using this metric of debt to GDP ratio. And because we have not reached the threshold of maybe 70%, they argue that we have the room to borrow more. But that does not apply in our own context. I say that because that theory presupposes that the GDP, is properly correlated with revenue. Because you use revenue to service debt. It presupposes that the bigger your GDP, the bigger your capacity to generate revenue to pay the debt. But when you look at the structure of our GDP, about 26% is agriculture.
About 22%, actually.
Agric
is 22%.
After this rebasing, it has gone up to around 25, 26. Now, you have that as a major component of GDP. How much revenue can you get from agriculture? It's almost nil. If anything, you have to subsidize that sector. So if you are counting that as a major part of GDP that gives you capacity to borrow more, then that's an illusion. If you take the trade sector accounts for around 16% of GDP. Between the trade sector and the agri sector, we are talking about close to 40% or more. The trade sector is populated by informal traders. How much revenue can you get from the trade sector? So if you are talking about this ratio, you have to discount this denominator, which is the GDP, to isolate sectors that are not contributing to your capacity to be able to repay the debt. So a more realistic proposition is to relate the debt to the revenue, which is something that is more realistic. Because if it is time to pay debt, you cannot pay debt from GDP. You pay debt from revenue. And we must emphasize that we should avoid a situation where we run into the risk of default in our debt repayment. That is very key, because when we look at the numbers, debt service to revenue is increasing at a level that is very, very disturbing.
Okay, Dr. Muda Yusuf, before I let you go, final question on revenue.
Yes.
I thought I read something you said in the course of the week about revenue when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu decided to extend the tenure of Mr. Wale Adeniyi, who is the Controller General of Customs. And one of the things you said is that, under him, there have been innovations and he's been able to generate more revenue for the Nigerian government. But I know there will be people who say, why extend his tenure? But you say, no, Customs is doing very well. I saw that.
What I said exactly is that under him, Wale Adeniyi, there has been tremendous improvement in terms of the capacity and in terms of innovation to the customs processes. Because we are in an age where if you want to transform any sector, it has to be technology driven. And he has invested a lot. There is a lot of investment. There is what they call the Customs Modernization Project. It's a very big project. Everything is around technology. There are new software that are indigenous that are being used. They call it Biodogo software. There are issues around the authorized economic operators relating to the private sector and all of that. So there's a whole lot of innovation that he has brought into the process. And I feel that one more year for him to advance. And there's also the single window. It's a project that the president himself is very passionate about. So it is from all that background. And only recently he was also elected as the chairman of the Council of the World Customs Organization. You don't put that kind of person out and they begin to wonder what is happening to Nigeria, you know? So from all of this, I think it's something that it is well deserved in my view, you know, at least for him to be able to complete. So, I mean, you can't finish the job anyway, at least to advance it significantly and hand over the baton to somebody else.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Wale Adeniyi, Customs Controller General. Here is Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. endorsing you, celebrity endorsement, we call it. Thank you very much for joining us.